Okay, I'm going to talk about some of the results of my surveys and why I chose specifically to deal with the learning style survey that yielded um, a wealth of data rather than a simple ranking of auditory, visual, or kinesthetic uh, learning preference. Um, and I did that. So these are the student results that I shared in my blog post. Um, And here I want to go into a little bit more depth about what I hinted at about differentiation and individualization. And when I started my career as a special education teacher, I became really aware of how people would often construe differentiation to mean that they would construct tiered lessons. Now, in a tiered lesson, you might see that the students who struggle would be presented with um, maybe shorter reading assignments, simplified vocabulary in the reading they might do, and particularly something that was particularly common in schools where I worked was I would see students in small reading groups and they would be assigned different tasks, the summarizer, the connector, the illustrator. So the students who struggled with reading might be asked to draw a picture in response to what they were reading rather than to generate higher level questions. And this observation makes me really wary of any categorization of student tasks that might allow us to present certain students with really differentiated expectations in a way, and that we don't expect them to engage with the highest level questions that are going on, that are part of the discussion in the classroom. So I'm I'm wary of that, and I think that um, rather than for me to generate different tasks for students based on my assessment of them, what I try and do is give them a lot of choice. And if I can give them maximize the choices I give to them, then they're more likely to engage fully and give me their best effort at the time and to make their best thinking transparent, and then I can support that. And I have to remember as a language arts or an English teacher that I have to be cultivating the critical literacy skills of all students. And so um, that means I'm going to continue to ask people who struggle with writing or struggle with reading to do this, to produce the same, to work that meets the same standards as everybody else. And it was interesting in looking at the survey that I chose to use on learning styles, which came from Edutopia, and it was based on the multiple intelligences theory put forward by Howard Gardner. And I chose to share in the DIGO group a YouTube video where Daniel Willingham, this cognitive psychologist, talks about his thoughts about learning styles and how they're often misconstrued to think that students are going to make meaning differently based on how stimuli are presented to them. And um, you can watch that video if you want to see more of his thoughts. But I think that the survey on Edutopia is actually kind of interesting because while we're putting forward a survey about learning styles and asking students to take a quiz, and then that's going to show their relative strengths on these multiple intelligences that Gardner put forward. There's this link here that says read more about the research on multiple intelligences and learning styles. And then when we come in here and we take a look at the research that Edutopia puts forward on their site, um, they make some statements that are a little bit perplexing because they say that the theory of multiple intelligences says that individuals are born with the innate capacity to succeed in a particular domain, and that education should help to identify and develop students' innate capacities. And I think that's actually at odds with then an interview with Howard Gardner that is on the same site that you can link to, and you can where Howard Gardner actually says that The term innate intelligence harbors a bunch of presuppositions. All of us have the range of intelligences. We differ only in how easily and how swiftly particular intelligences develop. The term innate has a death sentence quality, which I reject. And and then he says up here too, we have this idea from the other page that um, that the schools should identify students' intelligences and then sort of steer them in that direction and help them develop that. And Gardner says that his own philosophy is that when children are young, we should really encourage well-roundedness, and that as they grow older, it becomes more important to discover and cultivate areas of strengths. Livelihood and happiness are more likely to emerge under those circumstances. But he's very careful when talking about multiple intelligences and in his subsequent work, um, to caution uh, educators against sort of pigeonholing students and directing their instruction toward their expressed intelligences. And he's a big advocate of having everyone learn across all the disciplines and to really become expert in all disciplines, which is then going to facilitate their creativity. Um, So one of the things our school does, which I'm kind of happy with, is that we administer this via strengths character survey to students, and our counseling department does. And you can see the students create a little resume on their Naviance page. And in this student's resume, one of the things they say is, hey, my top 5 via strengths are appreciation of beauty and excellence, zest, teamwork, humor, and kindness. And this is the kind of thing that I'm trying to do with students when they take a look at surveys like this and they get their results, is rather than putting them into a category and catering my instruction to the results of that survey, instead I want them to reflect on their results, become aware of themselves as learners, say, hey, to what extent is this true for me? Um, does this fit with my perception of myself? Well, how does this inform my approach to my learning, and how can I play to my strengths while also addressing my weaknesses? I think it's really important that students don't see themselves as, oh, I'm really musically intelligent, so I'm going to shy away from the other things. That brings me to some learning theory statements that I've been sharing with teachers throughout the years when I present my work in my classroom. I talk about how knowledge and understanding are constructed. Learning is a process of creating personal meaning from new information and prior knowledge. The people of all ages and abilities can solve problems. Learning isn't necessarily a linear progression of discrete skills. This is something that's really important in those special ed contexts, and that we're asking students, even those ones who struggle with basic calculation or basic reading, ask them to solve complex problems as well, even though they might still be working on some of those more isolated skills. There's a great variety in learning preferences, attention, memory, developmental paces, and intelligences. People learn better when they know the goal and know how their performance compares to success criteria. It's important to know when to use knowledge, how to adapt, and how to manage one's own learning. That's where I emphasize metacognition, which I think helps students to manage their motivation, their effort, and then to interpret feedback so that they can make the best use of feedback and to subsequently guide their learning and their future performance. And a really big thing is that learning is largely a social activity, and the best thing I can do to differentiate for students is to let them interact with lots of other learners and hear how lots of other people engage with tasks. And so one of my favorite things to do is to say to students, hey, you choose what you're going to read and you choose how you're going to respond to it. And I give them constraints around that. And so these were some things some of my students did during first semester, where one girl was reading The Kite Runner and she decided to create an interactive timeline, and actually she's created this on a web page, and you can go in and click on any of these little things and read more about what she's learned about the timeline of what was going on in Afghanistan and how that impacted the characters in the story. And then here another girl decided to make a video about homeless youth in Chicago, because she was reading a book that was set in Chicago where the young protagonist was homeless. Another boy decided to create an informational text. He was reading Roald Dahl's autobiography, the portion of it that dealt with his time in World War II. And so he decided to create an informational text really bringing to life for readers the life of the soldiers in World War II. And so all of these students were required to um, engage in critical literacy and to target the same expressive skills and the same analysis of the books they were reading, but they got to, their choice allowed them to really stay engaged and to create products that were individually meaningful. And so, and as I said about the social learning aspect, one thing I try and do here in using technology and all of these techniques I think translate really well into a blended environment is I ask students to get feedback from peers and teachers throughout the process. And this is one of my favorite ways right now that I'm playing around with, which is to have students share a screencast of their ideas um, prior to writing. So this girl down here is making a screencast. Here on the left side of the screen is an outline, just a bulleted list of topics she wants to address in her essay. And then she's referring to supportive sources and sources where she's drawn information and people's viewpoints that she's analyzing in her essay. And she's just talking through it. And in 3 to 4 minutes, she rehearses what will become a 3-page essay later on, and she's much more able to be open to feedback that she gets on this screencast and completely rethink and try again and do multiple drafts. And I just think that's a really powerful revision tool for her right there in the early stages of her writing, so I like that. And you see in the Edmodo conversation, I'm asking students to share their screencast preview in response here. And so we had 26 replies, and the students were able to see the screencast of other people in other groups. And I just think how great it is that they can be able to um, just see how everyone else is approaching the task and help them find more entry points and more ways to stay engaged.